Welcome back to the Mind Body Project. Thanks for taking a little time to join me today. In late July of 1979, a missionary came to my parents' church all the way in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. This missionary had shared about BBTI, about Bible Baptist Translators Institute. My parents were in the congregation. Afterwards, they sat down with the missionary and he shared about the work that BBTI was doing here in Texas. So just a week later, on August 1st, my parents, as my dad told me the story, August 1st, they got on a plane. They come to Texas. George Anderson picks them up at the airport and brings them to BBTI. And so George gives them the tour, tells them all about it. That was August 1st. August 31st, just 1 month later, my parents load up 4 kids and they pull into BBTI. And I was 4 at the time, and that's how we landed in Texas. And we've been here ever since. So today with me, I'm excited about my guest. He was a missionary in Colombia, in Mexico, is a weekly radio host, a teacher, a leader, and the current director of Bible Baptist Translators Institute. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. Rex Cobb.
Thank you, Aaron. It's good to be here with you, and we remember some of those old times.
and this is part of my series of World Impactors, wow, this BBTI has impacted really globally. It's just amazing the impact they have. It's amazing the impact that it has had on my family. So I'm excited to be here today. And as I drove down here, BBTI is about to celebrate this tomorrow, the 50-year anniversary of BBTI. And as I drove down, so much looks different, but yet so much looks the same. I remember being, 5 and 6 and out here playing in all the pastures and all that. So for me, it brings back a lot of great memories. Rex, I'd like to go way back because I didn't know some of the history of BBTI. My parents shared your weekly or monthly newsletter with me that kind of celebrates the past 50 years. And how did the idea for BBTI start, and where did it start?
Well, actually, it started with a broken foot. We wrote about that in our paper many, many years ago in our publication. There was an Indian man named Faustino who come down out of the mountains, and he was in a city, and I believe it was Cuernavaca in the state of Morelos, or Guerrero, I'm not sure the state, but anyhow, there in Mexico, he became a Christian, and he was actually in a Bible Institute, and the man who lived here in Bowie for many years, Don Frazier, he was the one that began the Bible publishing ministry that we call Bearing Precious Seed. Well, he went down there, and he was with the missionary, Ralph McCoy, and he spoke to the students, and he challenged the students, including Faustino. He said, you men need to go back to your homes, back to where you came from, and tell others about Christ and take the gospel back with you. We can't go there, but you can. Well, Faustino, he was from an Indian tribe called the Tlapanecos, and he was not a Christian when he left, and I'm not sure if he left under good circumstances. We don't know all the history, but anyhow, he came out of the mountains and was challenged to go back. His father was, I believe, the village leader, the president of the village or whatever. He did not know how he would be received, and because sometimes the gospel is not always welcome in some of those places. They're very traditional, very fanatical about their religion. But another man from Bowie, Texas, Paul Henderson, who was the pastor of Central Baptist Church for well over 50 years, he was a photographer, and he knew Brother Fraser and he knew Brother McCoy, and they asked Pastor Henderson to come and go on that trip up to the mountains, up to this Tlapaneco Indian village, and take pictures of this event. It was kind of an historic event. It was the first time that the gospel message had gone into this place. And so now Brother Henderson...
And this is early 70s?
This would have been the late 60s.
Ah.
Actually, probably 68, 69, I'm not exactly sure. But Brother Henderson, he'd been to Mexico many, many times, but he couldn't speak Spanish. And so the son of Brother McCoy, Lyle McCoy, was going to go with him. He grew up there. He spoke English and Spanish perfectly. But he broke his foot playing soccer. So they needed somebody who could speak both English and Spanish to help Brother Henderson. And so they called on George Anderson. And George was in another part of the country of Mexico, and he drove all night, I guess, to get to where he needed to be. They got on a horse. I saw a picture of Brother Henderson on a horse and George on a mule. And when I point him out, I say, now, this is George and this is the mule. And so Brother George will be here, Lord willing, tomorrow. He's still with us, still going strong. He pastors a church. Well, so they take off up into the mountains. They're well received in that village, and George and another brother named Travis Duffy, they returned to the village later to try to win the people to Christ and disciple them and teach them the Bible. The problem that George found was that they spoke a different language. Their Spanish was very poor at best, and of course he knew nothing of their language. So he said, why can't I learn their language? Mm-hmm. How do I learn their language? And so he thought maybe he had missed something in Bible college that he should have learned. So he contacted the Bible college. He said, do you teach missionaries how to learn languages? And of course they said no, and he inquired around the country. I think he even contacted places in England, Canada probably. No school, especially no Baptist school, taught how to learn a language, and especially an unwritten language. In the Tlapaneco, I'm pretty sure it was unwritten at that time. So he said, how can I do this? How can I learn their language? Well, he heard about an organization called New Tribes Mission, and they were a good group of people. They weren't Baptist exactly, probably pretty close. Mm-hmm. But they were training their missionaries in linguistics and language learning and all of these things. So George talked to them and said, hey, can I come to your school? It was a 2-year school. He said, I want to start a school like this for Baptist missionaries. And they said, come on. And he went with them, he and his wife Sharon. They studied and got all of the information that they could get from the New Tribes people. And they came back to, actually to Fort Worth is where we began. And that was in the fall of September, I believe, of 1973, 50 years ago. My wife and I were planning to be missionaries in Mexico, and we heard about this school. And so we said, hey, let's find out about this. And I flew down just like your dad did. And George Anderson is, well, he's a salesman, I guess. And he sold me on the idea of preparation. Besides Bible school, it's wonderful to know the Bible, but that doesn't enable you to communicate the Bible in another language and another culture. So that's the challenge. So he explained to me about phonetics and linguistics and culture learning and all these things. I didn't understand probably much of what he was saying, but it sounded good. So my wife and I, we were a little younger back then, and we had a 3-month-old baby. We came to Fort Worth, Texas, we started in a church there, in a Sunday school room, and started having classes. Well, that wasn't the best place for training missionaries, and so we started looking for property somewhere where we could develop a school. And Brother Henderson just happened to know of this property here. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but a lady named Maggie Brown and her husband Leon, they're from Bowie.
Mm-hmm.
They had a boys' home here on this property, and I believe Brother Leon's health got bad and they were not able to continue, and so they had the property, 117 acres, and you've been around it as a kid.
Yes.
It's a beautiful place.
Yeah.
Woods and pasture. I mean, it's Texas.
It's great.
It's dry right now and hot, but we're out in the country in a safe place. We don't worry about people coming here and doing any bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And so we found this property, and the Browns donated the property to the church, and the church gave it to us. Half of it was paid for, and the other half was they still owed some money on it, and BBTI assumed the responsibility, and that's been paid off for years. So
mm-hmm.
everything we have here is free and clear, and we don't go into debt. The Lord provides. Everything we built, or houses we've moved onto the property for the students, all of it is paid for, and God provides. We're not a big school. We don't have any national organization. We don't have any. We're not very organized at all. But I believe God has used the school. We wish that we could have done more, and we hope in the days to come that we can.
When we want God to provide, He's provided all these years for BBTI. I think sometimes we think, well, He didn't provide good enough, but He provided the way He needed to provide for. So, when I was a kid, we lived in, I think my parents called it a shotgun house. I pulled one up, I saw one that looked just like it. I don't know if it's the same one.
It probably is. We call it the long house.
Yeah. So, we didn't have AC. We didn't have air conditioning. We had fans that we turned on. My sister's chore was to take the bucket out to the outhouse to dump it. That was her job from the house. So, we were provided for, but sometimes we think, well, that's not very glamorous, But God met our needs. It was always my brothers. They always had a good time because if she was carrying it out to the outhouse, they would scare her, and then that would make a mess. But so I think sometimes we think, He provides. It just sometimes isn't the way we would like it to be necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting to me when sharing that this idea really started out of a need. How do we fix that need? And George Anderson said, let me find out a solution. And then he got other men, other families together to solve that need. And 50 years from there was when you came, was there just 3 or 4 along with the Andersons?
Yes, there were 3 families plus the Andersons, the first class, and then some others came along, and some of us went on to the field, and so that's the way it's going.
And in the last 50 years, how many countries would you say have been affected?
Oh my! I listed all the countries I could think of in our last publication,
and there was probably,
I'm thinking 56 countries. Now, not all the missionaries are still there, but at least we've had a presence in all these countries. Some countries had several missionaries go to, like Papua New Guinea and China, and others fewer. But there is a need out there.
And that's a big impact over the last 50 years, from George Anderson having, wanting to fix this problem along with 3 other families and saying, how do we make this, that small idea grew into something that went into all these countries and continues to grow. Each year you have students come.
Yes.
Now, are they coming from the mission field, or are they preparing to go into the mission field?
Most of them are new students, new missionaries. We get missionaries that are already sent out. They're planning to go to a certain country many times, and they'll come here. And others, especially single students, they will come and they don't know where they're going for sure. They're willing, and they're just looking for the Lord's will. And we find that not all of them, unfortunately, make it to the mission field, but many of them do. And young ladies and men, usually men, young single men, end up being married when they go to the mission field. Now, there are some exceptions, but in our world today, most of the missionaries that I know of, the men have wives, and so but we're willing to train anyone, that meets doctrinal standards and the qualifications, and we're not real fussy about we want to qualify rather than disqualify.
And this is a 9-month program.
Yes, the folks come here in August. We begin like the 3rd week in August, approximately, like a regular school year. And then we have a graduation in May. So each year we have to get a new group. Not like a college where you have freshmen and then the freshmen come back and, you could have a little bigger school every year. And another thing I would mention about our school is both the husband and the wife take the same classes. We want Mama to be just as prepared to learn languages and cultures as Dad is. We want, even though she's got children perhaps that she has to educate, and she has a home, but she's a missionary too. And I like to tell people that half of the population is female. And so who's going to reach them except other lady missionaries? And so mothers can be missionaries, and we want them to be able to learn the language just like her husband does.
And so when they come and they go into their mission field, wherever that country may be, they've learned how to, if it's an unwritten language, how to translate the Bible into that language.
Yes. It has to begin with language learning. So you've got this language, all these sounds, they're going to be different than our English sounds, but the phonetics teaches them to recognize exactly what the sound is, how it's being made, and the missionary has probably learned to make that sound in the classroom. There's a symbol for every sound, and he's able to identify the sound and then gradually learn the language and learn it with a good pronunciation because he knows what that native speaker is doing to make the sounds. He understands the mechanics of speech, we might say. And the good news is that everybody's made the same. We may look different on the outside, but we all have the same speech mechanism. And if that man can make that sound, I can make it too. That's the theory. Now, it doesn't mean it's easy, but it can be done, but recognizing the difference. So you're going to have to learn the language, then you've got to give the language an alphabet. Well, we don't just give them A, B, C like we have in English. We take the sounds that they have. This is a course we call phonemics. There's phonetics and then phonemics. And we, based on the sounds that we find in the language, we develop an alphabet. Now there's sounds that may be different to us, but to the people they're the same sound. Like we might have 3 or 4 different types of T.
Uh-huh.
Well, to us it's just a T, so we can just use one symbol. But in this other language, those different types of T's may require 2 different symbols because they change the meaning of a word. Anyhow, it's an interesting study. It can get pretty deep, but basically we're giving them an alphabet that matches their speech, so that when they go to read it, they can learn to read probably easier than we can, because our English is so inconsistent with our symbols and our sounds. And so you've got to develop the alphabet. Then you have to know how to write those words. We call that morphology. How the words are made, how we change words. For instance, in English, I might say the word success. Okay? If I add a successful, I add that suffix, that changes it a little bit, doesn't it? And then I could say successfully, and that ly that we put there makes it a adverb, I believe. Then we could put something on the front of it like unsuccessfully, and so that's the way we make our words. Well, we know how that other language makes its words, so we know where to put the word breaks, what is a word and what is a part of a word. And so we can write the language in a way that they understand, and then we can go from there to Bible translation. Now, another thing that we teach that is very, very important, it's vital, is culture, anthropology, we might say. We've got to know the culture of the people, because the words reflect their thinking and their way of life. And so you've got to learn culture and language. They're like 2 sides of the same coin. And so we teach a lot about that.
So when if it's a spoken language, but there's no written language, so then once the language is written, do you have to teach then those natives of that area to then read?
Right, yeah. We teach a course here called literacy. So we teach the students how to understand the situation of the people. How will they learn best? And we'll teach how to have a literacy campaign, how to organize people. And you don't just hand them a Bible and say, here, read this. We don't do that with our children. And so we have to produce literature that's simple and easy for them to understand in their language, and then they start learning that, and hopefully they will get an interest in reading their language. We can give them stories that they already know. We can write them, and then as they read them, they think, hey, this is our story. This is our history. This is our. It may be just a fairy tale or something. No.
But in order to get those stories, you have to learn what the culture is.
Yeah,
they have to communicate with the.
Sometimes we could translate something that would be helpful to them about health or farming, something that would benefit them, but yet would also give them something to read. See, the people in these languages oftentimes feel inferior. They think, well, our language is not important. It's not like English or Spanish or Portuguese. Our language, it is important. It's their language, but it's not a major language in the world, but it's their language. And so we have to motivate them to love their language and to we give it. We want to respect their language. We want to respect them and their culture. Usually, this type of person in their group has been persecuted or been humiliated by the the major society. They've been looked down on, and so they may not have a real high opinion of themselves and their language and their culture, but we want to respect that, and we want them to be able to read the Bible eventually in their language, because that's what's going to speak to their heart. And, we might learn another language and we can read a Bible in another language, and I do, but I can tell you it's not the same. Your own language it just speaks to you.
And so when the missionaries go out into the mission field, are they already aware of the culture and the language, or is it kind of like they're dropped off and then, I got to figure all this out?
Well, it depends on who's been there before them. And sometimes they can learn from other missionaries. They might learn from books to a certain extent. But basically, they're on their own. There is that culture shock, maybe that, and the language barrier and all. So
there are many missionaries that come from BBTI that where one from BBTI, let's say they're in Peru, and then another missionary from BBTI comes and kind of takes over for them and they leave. Does that happen very often, or is it to carry on the work? Because this sounds, honestly, it sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like you're not going to do this in months.
Yeah.
It's years.
Well, there may be a BBTI graduate in a place, and another missionary will come and work with him, perhaps. But and this would be good, but where there's too few of us, and so we don't always want to have a lot of missionaries in one place. They're not necessarily needed. They're needed, but they're needed somewhere else more, I would say. So the BBTI graduate may go work with another missionary who's not a BBTI graduate, and then from there, work out in a newer area. It is helpful when someone goes before you and can kind of help you when you get there.
Yeah.
But there's been some that just have to go. Somebody has to be a pioneer. Someone has to go there first.
And so are there other programs now, other schools that teach what BBTI is teaching, or is it still pretty much one of the very few?
I think it is very rare. I don't know of any other school quite like BBTI. There is a school in Ohio that has been functioning now for 2 or 3 years. It is, they teach many of the same things that we teach, and they may teach some of them in more detail because they're a 3-year program. It's like a graduate school. So they're a little more, how would I say, well, you have to have a bachelor's degree to go there in the first place. We get some here that probably haven't even made it through high school. But some of them are great missionaries. They probably graduated, or homeschoolers never quite seem to finish sometimes. But we prefer, they go to Bible college, learn the Bible well. But some people already, in their experience in their home church, they don't necessarily go to Bible college. And if they meet other requirements that we have, we will accept them.
And you have a hefty fee to come here, right?
A hefty what?
A hefty fee, a price.
Oh yeah, it's very.
Well, it's free, correct?
Yes, it is. It's the students don't pay any tuition, and the reason we can offer that is because we who work here don't receive any salary. We pay our housing fee, the students will pay a housing fee, and it helps to cover the utilities and upkeep a little bit on the houses, but it's very minimum. Excuse me. There's a missionary can come here when he first gets started, when he has very little support, and he can survive and study. We can visit the churches on weekends, and we have a lot of them, and he can raise his support and
support, for those that may not know, is the church would support them and say, we're going to give you so much money on a regular basis.
Right, yeah. As independent Baptists, that's the way we usually do it. A missionary will go to a church and present his plans for a certain field, and the church will hopefully vote to help him, and maybe $50 a month. And now some churches are getting real generous, maybe $100, even more. I'd like to find someone.
So, how long have you been director of BBTI?
We have been here now. We came off the field of Mexico in 1999, and then I became the director in about 2005, I believe. So we have been here 24 years, working and teaching.
So as you mentioned, the fee is free. The students pay some housing fee when they come, and partly because that is being able to be done because the staff doesn't take a salary. So some may be thinking, well, why do it? And how do you survive?
Well, for instance, I have support from when I was a missionary in Mexico, and most all of our churches continue to support us. So that helps me and my wife, where we don't have to receive any salary from the school. And we also have churches and it's a few individuals, even BBTI graduates, some will send a monthly offering, and the churches that support us, we don't have a big network, but the Lord provides, and when we need to buy a new water heater or we're working on a building, we'll have a little bit, and besides what the students pay and we all pay for our housing, then we get by pretty good. You know, the Lord always provides. And for instance, we're looking at moving another house onto the property. I think it's a triple wide mobile home, or I'm not sure what a triple wide. I know what a double wide is, but somebody's going to give it to us. We just have to pay to move it. So hopefully we'll have enough money saved up where we can pay the mover and then fix the house up as we need it. And we have in the afternoon what we call work detail. So
I remember work detail. I remember my dad. Yes,
your dad probably told you about that. Well, the men all work together, even the single girls or married ladies without children. They'll work a couple hours in the afternoon. But the men will learn many building skills, electrical or drywall, or so that you go and live in a thatched hut. You could put drywall on the wall. Wouldn't that be nice? But it's interesting. When we built this building, we had a group of students, and we did all the work on the inside, drywall and everything. One man came from, he's American, but he'd been working in China. He spoke Chinese real well, and he went back to China. Well, he learned how to do the drywall thing, and there, when they have a church service, of course, we're talking about a communist country where they don't exactly care for Christianity, so they have to be quiet. So they moved into a place, just a house. It was a house church. They had to build maybe a fake wall, for sound,
Uh-huh.
and so he knew how to do that. And I thought that was kind
And he
of
learned it here.
yeah, he learned it here at BBTI. But just working together is what we call good missionary training. Missionaries don't always get along on the mission field, but we need to learn how to do that.
Why is that? Why?
Because we're people. I don't know.
That's a good answer.
Well, I can tell you one reason. It's because the devil doesn't want us there,
Mm-hmm.
and there can be conflicts. We see that in the Bible in Acts chapter 15 between the Apostle Paul and Barnabas. They were the best of friends. They worked together, and then they had a problem and separated. It's kind of an embarrassing passage of scripture. You think, how could these wonderful Christian people have a problem like that? But see, we need to learn to work together. Sometimes working with guys, we have different opinions and there's clashes, but hey, these things can work out.
So do you see those clashes during work detail sometimes?
Sometimes,
and
yeah.
they have to kind of work it out, and it's a good learning time.
Yeah, I think so.
Uh-huh.
Not anything major,
Mm-hmm.
not any big deal, but just life is like that.
Just people and working,
yeah.
they learn how to handle some of those things and those conflicts.
We're Christians, but we don't always act like it. So,
yes. How is you have 4 daughters?
yes.
And have any of them gone into the mission field?
Well, we have one daughter who, she and her husband went to Canada, and they were planning to start a church. My son-in-law is pastor of a church there in Canada. It's not exactly a mission church, but it's an established church. Then we have a daughter and her husband, and they have 5 children in Peru, South America. And we have another daughter who's in Kansas City. Her husband is a pastor. And our youngest daughter is in Oklahoma City. Her husband is a song music director at his church. And so they're all in the Lord's work. 2 of them are in foreign countries.
Mm-hmm. So you may not see them as often, but...
No, not too often. But
And what is the plan when you came back from Mexico and Colombia to BBTI to be more involved in the training of missionaries?
Yes, Brother Turner, who was the director, he was here pretty much by himself. He and his wife. His first wife had passed away, and then he remarried, and he was basically teaching all of the classes by himself, and it's a lot of work. I mean, you get done with one class, and then you start another, and he really needed help, so they'd been asking us to come help them, and we really didn't want to leave Mexico. We were comfortable there, and we're thinking too, well, what are our churches going to say if we leave the foreign field and come back here? And fortunately, most all of them understood. But it's not like we wanted to leave the foreign field, but we saw that this needed to be done. And honestly, we felt like the future of BBTI might be in jeopardy unless somebody stepped in and helped Brother Turner.
Mm-hmm.
And so from there, the Lord has given us other good people to work with us, and so it's that's kind of the way it goes.
And do you have many people that come visit BBTI as in to find out what you're doing and maybe to be able to start something like that? A school or something. Do you have many people that come visit to say, "What are you doing?" So we're in, but kind of like George Anderson did all those years ago, and.
Well, that hasn't happened that I know of too much, although we have a good friend who started a ministry in India. And there's a Bible college there, been well established, and he works with some of the students, the graduate students. They've already been through the college, and that he'll hand pick a few of them each year, and they will train them in linguistics and Bible translation. Now, it's not an official BBTI India,
Uh-huh.
but most of the workers that have helped this brother, the teachers, are BBTI graduates. And so in a way, we have kind of reproduced ourselves in India. In fact, there's a couple here right now. They came for a visit. They'll be here tomorrow for the picnic. And the girl was single, and then she married a good brother from India, from north eastern India, the Manipur area. And together they're doing Bible translation. Well, he graduated from the college and then the linguistic school program, and now he's translating in his own language. His language didn't have a good translation of the Bible at all, and they're almost finished with the New Testament. And so, but we need to have this type of training in the Philippines, in Africa, maybe South America, maybe, I don't know, Korea or somewhere. We need to be training missionaries, not just American missionaries. And so that's something that we think about. But
until you mentioned that, I think of missionaries as all being from America, but they're missionaries from all other countries also.
Actually, I'm told that the Philippines and Korea, South Korea, are sending out more missionaries than the United States of America is. These relatively small countries are doing more than we are. That's a shame, really.
Have you seen a decline in missionaries over the years?
I believe so.
And what would you say was the reason for that?
Well, they're just not being produced by the churches. They're not being raised up in the churches, and that's where the missionaries have to come from. And so, unfortunately, I just think I hate to speak bad about our churches, but since COVID, there's been it's been a struggle for a lot of churches, and it just seems to be a complacency that is sort of set in on the whole country. I don't know. There are pockets of maybe of revival and missionary activity, but most churches, it's just kind of on the back burner, it seems like to me. It's people are busy, they have their lives, and they just don't have this burden maybe for people they don't even know, never seen on the other side of the world. There needs to be a compassion for those people because Jesus died for them. And so it's something that I don't know how to stir it up. I try. I need to stir myself up, but Jesus said, the harvest is plenteous, but the laborers are few. And that's the way it's always been, but it seems worse today. Maybe tomorrow it'll improve, I hope.
As we just collectively keep praying for it.
Yes.
But it also puts responsibility on the churches.
Yes, exactly.
To build those future missionaries.
Yeah. I think, and I might get in trouble because sometimes I think preachers will sometimes say, well, God needs to call more missionaries. Okay, so it all depends on God. But we've got to produce material for God to use. In other words, yes, God has to call them, God has to deal with them individually, but they need to be there to begin with. We need to reach them. We need to teach them. We need to disciple them. We need to expose them to missions, just like your parents took you to Mexico when you were a kid. You got exposed to another culture, and we need to teach people about mission. We need to make it a big deal, instead of just something, that's just for those few special called people. Well, we need to, I don't know how to explain it, but
there has to be a challenge to the churches that they are building it so that when they are called, they're ready.
yeah,
They are looking for that call. They're looking for that opportunity. They're being exposed to that because sometimes we don't know what we don't know.
right.
And if we're not exposed to those things, we don't know that maybe we have a calling for that because we never knew that existed. And if we're exposed to that, the church exposes us to that. If it's the kids, adults, wherever it is, and the missions is a heart of the church.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we do get, I agree, complacent, and our mission is just within our community.
Exactly, yeah.
But
that's what we can see.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we can feel that need, but we need to get concerned about what we can't see. We know it's there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking the recruiters for the military will visit the high school.
Mm-hmm.
Why does he do that? He wants to challenge those young people to consider the military, whether it's the Air Force or the Army or Marines or whatever. They need to be exposed to it. They need to be challenged. They need to have a vision for what needs to be done. And in the same way with missions, we need to challenge young people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I don't see a lot of. I don't hear it like I think I should, from the pulpit, from the Sunday school teacher, from the parents.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it really has to begin. We need to be reading missionary stories to our children. We need to teach them about Judson and Carey and Goforth and all these famous missionaries.
And just from us speaking today and sharing that all those 50 plus countries that missionaries have gone to from BBTI,
Mm-hmm.
All those different languages that didn't have any written word are now being able to translate the Bible into that. And when we share those stories, I think share what's possible. Because I think sometimes we don't know what's possible. Well, let somebody else do that.
Yeah.
That sounds good, but I'm too busy. I have this, I have that. So I think that is, we have to show whether it's a church, our children, it starts within our home, our spouses, what's possible.
Right.
And I hope today, from us visiting, that we share what's possible.
Yeah.
And what kind of impact 4 families 50 years ago has had on the world.
Well, I personally believe that every Christian needs to be involved in missions in some way. If nothing more, and that's not a small thing, we need to pray for the missionaries we know of, and we need to pray for more. Jesus said, "Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he would send forth laborers into his harvest." So there's prayer, there's giving. It's expensive to send missionaries and to keep them on the field and just to get there, and move a few possessions. That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's the finances we need to give, and we need to go. Some of us maybe can go farther than others, but everybody could go to the nursing home and be a blessing to somebody, or everybody could go to their neighbor, or this is a mission field too. It's it requires everybody
Mm-hmm.
involved.
And I think you're right. Oftentimes we think of the mission field of all those foreign countries.
Mm-hmm.
I had a conversation with my dad not too long ago, and we were talking about things, and I was going through some challenging times, and he said, maybe where you're at is your mission field. And when you look at it differently of how can you help those around you and go out and help them, that becomes your mission field.
Right.
And maybe it starts there,
Mm-hmm.
and then God calls you for something bigger.
Right.
But
yeah.
it starts small, and how can I make a difference here?
Mm-hmm.
And you learn some of those things, and then He prepares us for those bigger things.
I believe that's the way it works.
Mm-hmm. I just want to share a quick story with you. My dad, I don't remember his name, but it was here at BBTI, and he had mentioned, and you might know him, he had copied the Bible. I don't remember what his name was, but he had told my dad how it would be life changing to copy the Bible. Write it down, copy it. And my dad, that was probably 40 years ago, so my dad was a lot younger then. And of course, he didn't have time for that. And this past year, my dad, for every day of the year, for 365 days, he went into his office and spent a couple hours each day copying the Bible. And he said it changed the way he looked at the Bible. He learned it and understood it in a way that all those years of preaching, of being a missionary, he never understood it.
Wow.
And I'm blessed because of that gentleman all those years ago, my dad was blessed to even further understand the Bible in a different way. And I'm blessed because I get some of those copies that he writes of the different books that he thinks would be applicable in my life and help me to see those words and see, in my dad's handwriting. It's just a blessing. So it's an impact that all those years ago is having an effect on my dad now, later in life. He just turned 80, having an effect in my life. Those are things that I'll give to my kids that will have an effect in their life. So I know probably for BBTI there's so many stories like that. That really is mission work. It's mission work within my family.
Well, I know who it was. I think it was Brother Don Frazier that challenged your dad to do that. I'm sure it was. And I'm thinking there was a lady at Eastside Baptist Church a few years ago, Tina Clark. She's with the Lord now. But she copied the King James Bible from Genesis 1 to Revelation 22, whatever it is. And every word, left-handed even, and on yellow, that tab, little legal pad like, she copied every bit of it. That's how they used to do it. The Wycliffe Bible was before Gutenberg invented the printing press. A handwritten copy would cost like the wages of a man for 1 year. I mean, it was expensive, but it had to be done by hand. And there's copies of that Bible today that have existed all those years, but it was all done by hand. That would give you an appreciation for our Bible heritage.
It's so it's quite a blessing. If people want to contribute, donate, help in any way, is there a website that they can go to for BBTI?
Well, we don't have any online giving. We just haven't got into that. A lot of churches and groups do that, but I've never felt comfortable about that. If someone wanted to write a check and put it in that envelope and send it to Box 1450, Bowie, Texas, we would be glad for it. The Lord takes care of us, and we don't do a lot of asking on our radio program. We've been on the radio for 16, 17 years.
And how many countries?
Well, it's heard, or even on the radio or internet, we know of at least 236 different countries and territories. At least one radio network has told us that. So, but we never asked for anything, and the Lord provides our needs, and it's amazing how people are generous, and they have helped us. And I just really like it that way better, because if I was a slick, fundraiser, I could say, man, look what I've done. But all I can say is, look what God has done. So, but, and we need God's people to pray for us, that's for sure. And look at our website and all of that, find out more about it. And one thing that I always encourage our radio listeners to do is tell others about BBTI. When a missionary comes to your church, tell him about our school. If he doesn't know that we're here, doesn't know what we have that will help him, it doesn't do him any good. I don't know how many times missionaries have told us, I wish I would have known about BBTI before I went to the field. It would have helped them.
So it makes their job a lot more challenging.
Yes.
Yeah. I always ask my guests at the end, and I really am interested to hear yours, at the end of life. It's you just have maybe a few days left of life, and you look back over your life. What would you say, looking at it, say that was successful? If this was a successful life.
Well, just honoring God and being a help to other people, telling others about Christ. When a person accepts Christ, he's saved eternally, and if I can be used to give him that message, I think that's success. If I can do it in another language, in another culture, and whereas there's few maybe to do that, I think that's success. I've got a little note on my desk at home, and I don't even know who said it, but the man said, I do not fear failure as much as I feel success in something that's not God's will. We can be successful in this life, but not be in God's will. And getting the gospel around the world is God's will. And being involved in that, I can feel satisfied that I've done something. I will always wish I'd done more. And never satisfied that I've done what I could have or should have. But well, I'm not sorry. I'd do it again in a heartbeat if I could. I wish I could.
I think when we always feel like, well, I want to do more. I always think we feel that way. But thank you, Rex, for joining me today. Thank you for sharing the story of BBTI, of all those that they've reached, of all those yet to be reached. Students can come here, of course, free of charge. They can learn how to translate those unwritten languages into the Bible and make a difference. And I want to thank you for all you've done through the years. Thank you for what you did for our family. I remember it as a kid. It was one of my best times as a kid. So it was a pleasure to me. And again, coming out here is just a treat for me to see all the memories to come back. And congratulations on 50 years. And I want to point out again, it was just an idea in a small classroom because of a broken foot that really began to change the world. It didn't change, and it changed one person at a time. Just like the missionaries that come in, they learn one at a time, and we interact with one person at a time. If we can make a difference with one, they might make a difference with one, and that compounds. So I appreciate your time, Rex, and thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you I've enjoyed this time. It's been a blessing.
Well, thank you. Thank you to each of you for stopping by. As I tell my wife Kim every night before I go to bed, it's Bomb of the Night, AA, out.